Hey everyone, this is Joe from Thunk Tank Podcast, and today I wanted to just talk a little bit about an issue that has been on my mind the last couple of weeks, but I didn't have a chance to get around to addressing either here or on the podcast, and that is, of course, the now infamous Elon Musk Joe Rogan interview. I'm sure we'll talk about this more on the podcast in coming days, but for those of you who aren't familiar, Joe Rogan, who's a podcaster, he hosts on YouTube and he had Elon Musk finally on his podcast. It was a long awaited interview. And one of the things that Joe Rogan often does on his podcast is he may or may not have a drink, and he may or may not maybe light up a joint with his guests, being that he's in California where marijuana is legal. And of course, this came up in the interview with Elon Musk, and that's all the media could talk about. So I wanted to just share some thoughts on why the media outrage over this extends beyond just a problem of coverage and to issues that I think are really going to work against them, continuing in this type of vein going into the 2018 midterm elections. Uh, if that sounds like a lot, it is. So I won't cover it all here, but just briefly, um, I wanted to point out how CNN, which of course claims themselves to be partial, or is that impartial? Impartial. Um, whereas I think that they're being partial in this case. Um, Covered the what they call incident, and so you can see here very clearly. I had the wherewithal, even though I didn't have time to talk about it at the time, to take a screenshot of how they covered the interview on their page. And as you can see here from the headline, whiskey, Tesla, and a flamethrower. This was, I think, almost 3 hour interview with Elon Musk where they talked about topics and very important topics. Elon Musk is more than just an entrepreneur and businessman. The industries that he's created and he's investing in, whether you like him or not, and I'll get into why there's certainly plenty of room for criticism of him in different ways in a moment, but a lot of these industries that he's trying to get in, he really is trying to address issues that are really facing humanity going into this new century, 21st century. And that's when we talk about that, we're talking about him and Tesla, which is his electric car company, trying to take on a over century old established auto industry, built on fossil fuels with his electric cars. His private space company, SpaceX, which is already has secured contracts and is making money, is expanding their capabilities seemingly almost daily, but certainly year by year. And I think a lot of this type of coverage you see here, Elon Musk smokes a joint during an interview. I mean, they talked about the danger of AI, the danger of climate change, how to address some of these issues. And again, an almost 3 hour long interview. And this is what they choose to cover. And I think in part that's because CNN and a lot of media decided that, this is how they're going to cover somebody like this. I think a lot of this may stem from the whole, I don't know how it's described, but his whole Twitter tirade, argument, feud thing with uh, that scuba diver who rescued those kids in that cave in Thailand. If you don't know that story, just Google Elon Musk cave diver Thailand feud, and you'll see how crazy that whole situation is. Basically, um, Elon wound up calling the guy a pedophile, and the guy's now, I think, suing Elon because they keep going back and forth on Twitter, or at least Elon is. And that's a fair criticism. He really should probably drop something as ridiculous and seemingly moot as that. But I think that that, along with a lot of other quirks, have soured a lot of people in media on Elon to the point where it's easy to turn on him and post a very jarring sort of incriminating headline like this. And you can see here from a rhetorical standpoint exactly what they're trying to do. Um, Framing him in this one shot, Elon smokes a joint during an interview. It's very basic. And then underneath, two executives quit Tesla. I highly doubt pun intended, that that's related to this incident at all. In fact, that might have even happened beforehand. I don't know. I forgot to check, but um, you see they're framing that within the light that, oh, you know, yeah, this is one thing leads to the other, and it's no short of logical fallacy from my point of view. And then of course you see, I mean, they do the pun with flamethrower and him smoking. Ha, very nice, CNN. And then there's a link to see Musk's torch gun in action. Yeah, that was another thing that I think is a fair criticism. He sold, I don't know, something like an insane amount, like 500,000 flamethrowers or something. They're really just torches. He addresses this in the interview. If you would like to see it, I highly recommend it. I'll link it in the description below. But yeah, he you see here they just link that in the description below themselves, and then how power changes the CEO brain. So no mention of any of the other topics or issues that I found were really fascinating to hear somebody, as innovative and proactive in, challenging long established industries. Again, whether you like them or not, and I think there's very fair, legitimate criticisms, but this is just reads very superficial to me, especially when you consider, you look at other CNN articles, and I wouldn't say that they're implicitly pro marijuana, but they certainly talk about the issue in light of, the fact that it is an offense that is becoming decriminalized more and more daily, on a daily basis, sort of. And you see articles like that all the time, sort of promoting it in that direction as part of their sort of overall set of values. You see here, whether it's from a socioeconomic standpoint, one way or the other, you see here it pitched as a business issue too, and really in a more positive light that in terms of pro decriminalization. So sort of this idea of playing upon certain prejudices of weed when it suits them, I find that very disingenuous. And again, I wouldn't put CNN necessarily in the same camp as Fox News or anything like that, but this does not help, when people like Donald Trump are stomping their feet and waving their finger at CNN and calling them bias and all these other insane things that he calls lots of people and institutions. This type of coverage doesn't help, I think. So my advice would just be to stick to the facts and, try to be genuine. I understand in the age of so much online media, multimedia, big news sites have to compete and they need clicks. And I think that's, again, on a superficial level, why they frame it this way, because Elon gets clicks, much like making a video on Elon, which is what I'm doing now. So I think that's why they do it. But again, I think this works into overall against their efforts of what they're trying to do. And I think that's important as, it's September 23rd right now, going into the midterm elections. That type of, more or less disingenuous coverage, I feel like, will work against them moving forward. So my only advice is to maybe take a step back and reassess that type of editorial coverage. The good news is, I think people can see beyond that, in the sense that whether or not they've gone to that video and that interview themselves to see what's going on, because of what, and I should mention, it wasn't just CNN. I mean, pretty much all the big news outlets reported it that way that I saw. NPR, sort of had a similar take on it in terms of the headline, at least. But you see here, I think this was within a week, it was already the most popular video on Joe Rogan's podcast, with 7.6 million views. Oh wait, that was as of 2 days after. Actually, it took 2 days for it to become, I believe, the most popular. And you see now, it is almost double the next most popular video on his podcast. It's number one. And I like to think that, again, maybe that's because people read headlines like that and were drawn to it. But, that full interview, 2 hours and 37 minutes, if you watch the whole thing, it's it's interesting, and it's interesting to hear what he actually has to say and sort of what makes him tick, whether you like him or not, honestly. So I would say give the interview a listen yourself. Hear what he has to say, and judge him based on his true merit and his true values, his true accomplishments, and his true faults. Um, yeah, because he's doing a lot out there. So I'll link some of that in the description. But I just wanted to share some thoughts. And again, I think this will come up a lot on the podcast moving forward. So that's all for now. Thanks for giving us a listen. If you have any ideas or thoughts of your own, please share in the comments below. And other than that, thank you again for listening, and we will see you next time. Thanks again. Bye bye.